You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnstone and this week with me I have Mansoor.
Hello.
And I have Connor.
Hello.
And we are following up on an episode that we did a couple of weeks ago and we're finishing off Dalek Universe. So we kind of left you on a cliffhanger. We finished the second set, we finished The Lost. It was an excellent episode and the Doctor and Anya got a message from a Dalek saying, "Hello, sweetie." So we knew River Song was going to turn up. And, well, River Song's not turned up for this podcast, sadly, but we've got us three, so we'll be all right. So we're going to look at the final Dalek Universe set in this episode, and we're also going to talk about Anya Kingdom as a character and Dalek Universe as a series and whether we'd like to see more series like this. So we're mopping up, and it's good to be back to talk about this because it was really, really good talking about the first couple of sets. So this one is just as good, the finale. So let's crack on. So we'll go straight to The First Sun, which is the first episode in this final set. And it's the River Song episode. We've got Alex Kingston looking like a Mavellan on the cover, which was pretty weird when it was first announced, I thought. Interesting idea. Let's see where this is going. And it's kind of as bonkers as the cover first suggests. The gist of it is basically River is pretending to be a Mavellan and pretending to not know the Doctor for reasons. Well, the reason being a child Mavellan. I feel as though a Mavellan child should have another name. But anyway. So, The First Sun, the first episode in this set. Do you want to go first, Mansoor?
Yeah, this works quite well following on from the previous one, because sustains the mystery or confusion about what's actually going on. I think the Mavellans are used quite well in these episodes, and obviously there are lots of Daleks in this one, but I've appreciated how across Dalek Universe the Daleks have been used quite sparingly, and I think that's a really good decision. I mean, some people might be disappointed by that, given that their name's in the title, but we do have a lot of Dalek stories, so it's nice to explore the other races and species around them rather than the Daleks directly. Yeah, and River's good in this. I think there's a whole sort of area of time where if David Tennant had stayed on for Stephen Moffat's era, we would have gotten a lot of stories with Alex Kingston and David Tennant. That seemed to be very much the intention of Silence in the Library, where she's saying about how young his face looks and all of that. But we never got that. So it's nice that we do have stories like this on Big Finish, and we've got that whole River and Ten box set as well that fills out some of their interactions. So yeah, nice strong start to the last box set, and it's like all the episodes do, it leads very nicely into the next one as well.
I think we absolutely had to get Alex Kingston in there, another River and 10th Doctor meeting. And we had the 10th Doctor and River Song by this stage, hadn't we? I think that came out about a year earlier. So we had the two of them. at Big Finish, but I think River Song had to fit into this set somehow, and I think she doesn't feel shoehorned in. She doesn't feel as though she shouldn't be there. Actually, it makes sense that she'd kind of bump into the 10th Doctor at this sort of weird pre-Time War stage that he's found himself at. Connor, what are your thoughts on it?
I'm not 100% sure about this one. Just compared to the others, it's still a very, very good story. It's a strange one. I think if you're getting Alex Kingston in to play River Song and having her be disguised for the entire story, bar a few lines at the end, as a Movellan, you're not getting the most dynamic performance from her. Now, it's worth saying her performance is great. Her performance, I think, for what she's given, is incredible. She walks this very, very fine line between us thinking she's a Movellan and us thinking it's River Song. I genuinely think it could have gone either way in this case. Whether, they could have revealed that she was playing a Movellan copy of River and River had actually met them, years before or whatever. I think that if that reveal had been in it, it would have worked. But I think whenever Alex Kingston turns up in Doctor Who, I want something a little bit more dynamic and a bit more interesting than her doing what is effectively a monotone voice, throughout. So it's a wee bit of a weird one, just the way it's written. It's not really what I wanted from a River Song story. I would have preferred something a little bit more involved as far as River Song herself goes. But this is okay. I think Cayman Vers is a great villain. Genuinely threatening and genuinely quite scary. Just this this young, more emotionally aware or more creatively, a Movellan with more of a capacity to think creatively. I think that works great. Great villain. And I enjoy him and the Doctor sort of facing off against each other at different stages throughout this. So that's a major plus in its favour. It just doesn't quite do what I want from a River Song story, unfortunately. Although it was lovely to hear her turning up in this.
I suppose keeping River in disguise till the bitter end kind of removed a potential level of threat from the story as well. She was staying in character for a reason, obviously, and if she'd have broken character, then the situation would have got a lot worse. So it was kind of interesting how actually they just kept it up till the end. Maybe they didn't want to go too big, too massive before the big epic Daleks versus Movellans 2-part finale. But I like this as a way of introducing the Movellans and kind of getting little bits and the characters and so on into the places they need to be for the finale. And it's just like that one last shuffle of the board before we move into something a bit bigger. But yeah, it's a fun little episode. It's a great opener for this last set. It sort of we are past the sort of more low key stage of this series now. I think it's fair to say that House of Kingdom and everything in the second set was a little bit more low key. There was nothing too big and epic and out there. But now we have moved into a things explode a bit more kind of phase of the story, I guess. Just the stakes are growing. And that, I guess, takes us nicely into the next episode, which is the Dalek Defense, the first part of the 2-part finale. I suppose the big thing about this episode is, as well as, again, just manoeuvring characters into places and having certain things happen, such as Davros arrive, and Davros comes into the story because he had to. It wouldn't be a big epic pre-Time War Dalek thing without him. And this is a really good one for Terry Malloy. I really, really like what we've got here. He's kind of in a similar role to Resurrection of the Daleks, and I think that's perhaps the best story from Davros's point of view, maybe. One to argue there. So yeah, I quite like this, but I think the big thing in this story is obviously the cliffhanger. It's the thing that it builds up to, which I think for various reasons we kind of saw coming, we kind of knew was going to happen before it happened, or we had a good inkling it was, or certainly as you're listening through the story, you probably got a good idea of who the big bad Mavellan boss is. But it's very enjoyable, and it is a nice big epic space opera. So Mansoor, talk to us about the Dalek Defense.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. It works really well. Like with this whole run being structured as a season, this does feel like the penultimate episode of a TV series. It feels very big. It's up the stakes. It has a massive reveal, and I think it's just, but also just as an episode on its own, the thing that carries it is the dynamic between Davros and the Doctor, which is always great, but between because this Doctor has faced off against Davros, but in a kind of much more sort of heated and brief way. He hasn't had those quieter, like intellectual battle of wills type moments that, like Colin Baker's got a lot of those in his stories, for example. Um, Tom Baker had a little bit on TV in Genesis when they're talking about ethical dilemmas and all of that. So it was nice for David Tennant to get a bit of those quieter, more contemplative moments with Davros in this story. And yeah, I don't know if I saw the reveal coming, but it, like I said, it works really well. I think in terms of upping the stakes, and it's good to have Mark back in some way. And it's like obviously a bit of a retcon, but the thing that Davros wonders about, Mark, Mavellan being a corruption of Mark 7 is a clever little way to connect it all up as well. Yeah, so I really enjoyed this. I think I'd say this is the strongest episode for me of the three in this box set.
Yeah, I think that's quite a fair thing to say. Actually, it's a very, very strong episode. It's, I think, something that often gets sort of levelled at telly Doctor Who is that the setup for the finale is perhaps better than the final episode itself. I know a lot of people have said this sort of thing about The Sound of Drums, or Utopia and The Sound of Drums. Said the same about Bad Wolf. Have said the same about Army of Ghosts, Heaven Sent, and yeah, I guess it's essentially the Cybermen as well. I suppose. I guess it's fair to say that it's, it is a really, really strong opening episode of a two-parter. Connor, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I think it's a really strong finale. I really, really like. I really like Davros as this sort of social manipulator. He sort of seems to sit in the middle of all the different factions here and play them off against each other, which works really well. Like, you're not entirely sure whether he's working for the Daleks or whether he's working, he is actually going to side with the Movellans, or what way, it's going to end up. And it ties in really well with his sort of relationship with the Daleks as it was presented on screen in those 80s stories. So I really like that. I love Terry Malloy's Davros. I think he is the best Davros of all the different versions that there have been. And it's a delight getting to hear him play off against David Tennant. I think it's really fun to hear David Tennant getting to play in his era of Doctor Who as well. Sort of that little bridge between Destiny of the Daleks and Resurrection. So it's a lot of fun. I think Davros is that sort of social manipulator, as I said. In addition to being the brilliant mad scientist, evil genius that he is, it feels quite similar to Davros, the story that they did with Colin Baker in the lead up to Zagreus. So that's that there's a lot in here reminds me of that story as well. Which is always nice to be reminded of because I love it so much. It's nice as well that they sort of return to Kemble, because that has been sort of this unifying factor, this unifying location across all three series of quote unquote the Kingdom Saga. You have it's there in the Daleks master plan. They revisit it in the Syndicate master plan, and then we obviously come back to it now, and this is the sort of finale for it all. So if that feels right and proper, and it's a nice sort of moment when it gets tied into, it's maybe in the next story actually, where the Doctor ties it into Sarah Kingdom. And her demise on Kemble as well, that he says something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm not going to lose another kingdom on this planet." So I like that. I like that we return to that location, that planet. It does, and they give it the emotional weight that it deserves.
It's also the second trip to Kemble for Anya as well, because obviously she went there with the Fourth Doctor in a very different kind of time zone and situation. But yeah, it's an excellent setup for an excellent first part of a finale. As we've all said, Davros is just brilliant, and there is something great about having David Tennant and Terry Malloy's Davros in this, and I think that mainly because of Big Finish, but also because he's so damn good on telly as well. It's difficult to not see Terry Malloy as kind of the definitive Davros, really. I know there are a lot of people who go, no, that's Michael Wisher, he did it first and he did it perfectly, and I fully appreciate that. But I do think that Terry Malloy he's certainly done it more than anybody else, and I can't help but think he's done it better than everybody else as well. I really do like his version of the character, and I think we get the best version of that version in this. Obviously, we're going into the finale where there's an interesting little Davros Terry Malloy editing error, but we'll discuss that in a moment. But let's move on. Let's go to the Triumph of Davros, which is the grand finale of Dalek Universe. This episode has an awful lot to do. It's busy. We've got a big space war with multiple sides going on. Davros is manipulating everything. The Doctor's kind of trapped in the middle of it. Anya's kind of signed up with the local army. And obviously, Mark is back, as revealed. Mark is the sort of prime Mavellan. He's the main Mavellan. He's the boss. And it's a nice little emotional kick, I think, sort of getting that reveal and finding that out. It's really, really well done. As I said before, perhaps a little bit predictable. Perhaps it's something we guessed was going to happen. But I'm really glad it did, and I think it happened really well. And it sort of adds even more emotional weight to the Trojan Dalek. That was such an excellent episode and had such a heartbreaking ending, really. I wish we'd have got more of this TARDIS team. I really do think that the three leads of Dalek Universe are brilliant, but I'm really glad that Mark did get often brought back in this way. I think it does work really, really well. So, the Triumph of Davros, Mansoor, you go first.
Yeah, this does work well. I think the two things, I think there is a little bit of what you said of it. To be fair, it's harder to do a final episode, I think, than it is to do a penultimate episode. It's easier to up the stakes um, and do a big kind of showy penultimate episode where everything's being unraveled. Putting that all back together in a really neat, 100% satisfying way, I think, is a much tougher job. And I think this does a lot of that. But like you said, there's a lot going on, and I quite often feel with Big Finish stories or stories in general that sometimes things go on a little bit longer than they need to, and I sometimes say that well, this 4-part story could have been 2 parts or 3 parts and been much tighter. I feel very much the opposite with this. I feel like this was good, but could have been better if it had if it had an extra episode or even an extra 30 minutes, if it was like a kind of overrunning 90-minute finale, just to give all those strands you mentioned a bit more space to breathe, because you've got there is a lot of character stuff that pays off, and you have that narration that calls back to the start of the whole series, and the Doctor losing Mark and Anya again. That all works well, but there were other bits that I think got a bit pushed to the side. Like it is explained, I'm sure, but like I felt it was quite quick. Just the resolution of how the Doctor actually gets home. Uh, there could have been a little bit more build up to that, and then similarly, again, I don't. Stories shouldn't drag on longer than they need to, but I could have done with a little bit more of a coda or follow up, because there's some sort of reset or change in time at the end, it seems, and with Mark, and um, I would have liked to have understood how that came about, or explored what was going on with him and Anya at the end, what they were going off to do. So good finale, but yeah, I would have liked to have had more of it to allow it all to breathe a bit more.
I'd agree actually that there's maybe we don't need more, like a third part or an extra bit of this, but I think we do need a follow up to it. Like, I genuinely want to know what happens, particularly to Anya next, because she sort of nearly gets killed, doesn't, and is now stuck outside her time. And, she's signed up with the same people she was signed up with, essentially, just a few hundred years different. And I do kind of want that to be picked up. I hope that is picked up at some point. There's still room for it to be picked up. And Jane Slavin is excellent and still working with Big Finish. So fingers crossed. Connor, what are your thoughts on the Triumph of Davros?
Yeah, as you say, it's a very, very busy one. I am a little unsatisfied with how the Doctor and Anya part company, because it does feel very rushed and very breathless, and they don't really get to say goodbye. And I'd argue that their conflict is never really properly resolved. You never really get the Doctor and Anya properly coming to terms with one another over the whole Anne Kelso thing. I don't think. Not in such a way as their conversation that they get to finish having that conversation, from what I remember. So I do think Anya's story feels very unfinished. I would love, we've said this before, we would love to hear more from Anya Kingdom after Dalek Universe. I do think she needs to meet the Doctor again, to fully close off that particular aspect. But I just want to hear more of her generally anyway, because I think she's great and I think Jane Slavin's great. So yeah, it's very big, sort of actiony blockbuster. There's not a huge amount of serious thinking needs to be done, but I don't particularly mind that for a series finale with Daleks. I think you get that. I think you sort of want that whenever you've listened through a series like this and it's getting to be the big Dalek action finale. I'm happy enough to listen to a Dalek action finale. So I don't have any real particular issue with that. And it's utterly a testament to the performers and their performances in this, that I can very happily listen to David Tennant and Jane Slavin and Terry Malloy and all else in this, performing together. So that's I think it's good. It's just a pity that the ending does feel so rushed, with the Doctor pretty much getting pushed out of the story by Anya, and they never really get to properly say goodbye, unfortunately.
I think that's a very fair point, actually. Like, a lot of people could perhaps argue that the conflict, the Doctor and Anya's story, is done in the loss. It's finished, but it's not. It ends with ground to still be trodden and conversations to still be had, and those conversations don't happen. I do kind of wish there was some kind of proper goodbye. I wish there was some, like you say, there was just something more to that departure, which again leaves me hoping that there will be something else at some point, hoping that there'll be more, not just more Anya, I guess, but more Anya and the Doctor. These characters should meet again. Definitely, there's room for them to meet again, and I'd be up for a Anya actually becomes his companion in the TARDIS post-Time War kind of situation, and let's do a series of that. Not that I think we'll be seeing David Tennant at Big Finish anytime soon, annoyingly, but it would be rather good. So that's Dalek Universe. We've done it. And it's a great series. It's a really, really good series. And I think that it sets a lot up, and I think it delivers the majority of what it promises. We should just sort of briefly talk about how it was a big Finish event, this was, and it wasn't just these 9 episodes across 3 sets. There were other things as well. There were other stories that tied in. There was a 4th Doctor story, Dalek Protocol, released under the Dalek Universe banner. River Song met Anya and Mark, as you know, as was mentioned in Queen of the Mechanoids in her own set. And I kind of wish there'd have been more of that. I kind of wish there'd have been more tie-in type stuff. You know, there was a chance here for it to feel like a proper expanded universe or mini bit of a universe, I guess, a Dalek universe. And I do like the fact that other stuff tied in, but I kind of do wish there was more of it. But is there just sort of anything either of you'd like to add about what we did get about Queen of the Mechanoids and about the Dalek Protocol?
Yeah, we did get a couple of stories. I think what would have been nice is a few more things, but maybe not too much more, because I think with those multimedia events like Time Lord Victorious and Doomsday, it can get a bit hard to make sure you've covered everything. But given how much the Movellans were in this, it would have been nice to have had maybe something expanding on the world of Destiny of the Daleks, or like a Movellan story that didn't feature the Doctor, maybe the prequel to show us how River joined up with them. So yeah, 1 or 2 extra stories might have been fun.
I wonder if a full Dalek universe linked River set could have worked, because we had Queen of the Mechanoids.
Yeah, because the
You know,
best River
maybe
sets,
yeah.
the best ones are the ones I think that have a through line, rather than just being a sort of random anthology.
I'd argue the best River song was one long story, and it was Friend of the Family. But yeah,
Yeah.
you know, outside of that, I think maybe River song in the Dalek universe, you know, she could have met or had something to do with the nun in an episode. There could, as you say, have been a Mavellan episode, and
Yeah.
there could even have been one where she just got tied up with the SSS or something like that.
I like the Mission to the Unknown sort of approach. Yeah, where it's the Doctor isn't in it, but it leads directly into this story. Yeah, that could have been good.
See, now you've said that, I'm actually surprised they didn't do it. Have a Mission to the Unknown type thing, because they're definitely riffing on Master Plan.
Oh yeah, very much.
That'd have been interesting. Anyhow, that's not what happened. But yeah, I'd like the idea that this did sort of, I guess, vibrate to other Big Finish things. It sort of made its mark elsewhere. And I do like the idea of, I mean, Big Finish does do shared universes, but they're usually quite small. You know, we had the Peladon box set, and we've got Sontarans versus Rutans going on at the moment. And actually, I think something a little bit bigger across a few sets could actually work quite nicely. I do think there's room for it. And, you know, it's something they did fairly early on. They did it with Excelis, and there's definitely room for it, I think. So I'm surprised we haven't really had anything else like Dalek Universe since. I know it was kind of a big lockdown, look, we've got David Tennant for 2 weeks to record kind of project, but I'm surprised we've not had some kind of central series, central story that other stuff ties into. And like I say, that kind of expanded universe thing, I do think there's room for them to try it.
Well, those once and future. I suppose with Big Finish, it's a little bit hard because I remember like the Virgin novels used to do little nice tie-ins between the missing adventures and the new adventures, but maybe it's a scheduling thing with audio drama because they'd have to like plan that a lot more carefully in terms of when they're recording and writing and releasing. Maybe it's a bit easier with books and comics.
Yeah, I suppose when you consider Once and Future, they recorded it over years. You know, they kind of grabbed people when they were in the studio and did, oh, let's do this one for the 60th as well.
Hmm.
Um, and Dalek Universe, they didn't have the luxury of that. Dalek Universe was, right, who we managed to post a mic out to? You know, whose mic of Royal Mail not lost? And that's kind of how it came about, I suppose. Whereas, yeah, the scheduling thing is a thing. Like, I get the impression scheduling can be a bit of a nightmare for Big Finish, and I'm certain it's the reason that releases change dates and get moved around and that kind of thing. So, Dalek Universe, as we've said, it was a series, it was events, other stuff tied into it. What do we think of it as a series? We've kind of discussed it episode by episode, but haven't really discussed it as a whole yet. So it's 3 sets plus a few add-ons. It's David Tennant as the Doctor. It's essentially David Tennant's fourth series. So just overall thoughts of Dalek Universe as a series. Go ahead, Mansour.
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of replicating the feel structure of a series, and actually, well, because the actually Doctor Who on TV is probably not quite as connected as this. Like when we have an arc, we have a lot more episodes breaking it up, but I actually prefer a bit more of a sustained run at the main story. That was kind of my frustration with Matt Smith's second series, Series 6, where you had this really, I thought, interesting arc running through it, and it got a bit disrupted and sidelined by a few too many just ordinary adventures slotted in there. Like a couple of those is good for breathing room, but um, so Dalek Universe, I think, is almost that sort of serialized storytelling, but without the interruptions, and just manages to keep the momentum up because of that. Um, so yeah, I think replicates the feel of a TV series and probably like improves on it a little bit in terms of the approach to serialization.
I think it's format-wise, it's quite interesting because it's trying to be sort of 60s William Hartnell over Doctor Who in terms of serialization, but it's also trying to be new Doctor Who in terms of serialization. It's trying to be Russell T Davies and Terry Nation at the same time, and it's a real mesh of styles, two very different styles, two very different eras of TV. And it just works really well. Like they fit together so well, and you do sort of find yourself wondering, well, is Doctor Who just Doctor Who? No matter how many reboots, renewals, regenerations, and so on we have, is it always just going to fit together? And is this kind of sandbox approach to it? Does it actually work? I guess.
Yeah, it pulls that off pretty well. And I think we talked about this last time, like the amount of pre-reading or pre-watching there is potentially to get all of it, because there's elements of Master Plan coming back, there's elements of the Kelso series coming back, there's TV stories like Destiny and all the stuff that happens with Davros. Um, but it somehow manages to not feel like a complete hodgepodge that's trying to mash all these things together. It feels like its own relatively coherent thing, and yeah, you get more from it if you've heard all of the other stuff. But I think, yeah, I'd be curious to know actually what it's like for someone listening to this cold without hearing the other stuff.
Yeah, because I suppose the last time I re-listened to it, I did it with absolutely everything you could possibly fathom as tie-in material alongside it. I did pretty much the complete Sarah Kingdon run, including companion chronicles and short trips and all sorts, early adventures, and it was great. It really worked. It felt really coherent. It was this good sort of mix of Doctor Who, and listening to Dalek Master Plan, the soundtrack of the Dalek Master Plan, and that kind of thing around it. It was just great. It really does work together well as a full thing, but I can't imagine what it'd be like coming to it new. And I imagine, as I said last time we talked about this, the last episode we did, a lot of people did come to it like that. They'll have seen David Tennant on the cover and gone, "Ooh, David Tennant and Daleks. Yes, I'll have that. Let's give it a go." And it'd be very interesting to see sort of, or hear what that reaction was. Connor, what are your thoughts of Dalek Universe as a whole?
It remains as exciting now as it felt the day, that it was announced and the day it came out. And, I think it was fantastic having that little sort of tentpole event listen throughout all of it. It was 2021, wasn't it? I think so. But it felt amazing. Like, everybody was listening to that. I remember people who didn't normally go for Big Finish catching up, doing Dalek's Master Plan, doing Syndicate Master Plan, and then doing this because, good grief, David Tennant was back. I feel obliged to make that'll never happen again joke again, because it did, that felt like a really huge thing. Like, this is David Tennant series 4. I still get that real shot of joy every time I listen through this and hear him doing another full series of Doctor Who. The 10th Doctor adventures that aren't in Dalek Universe, so volumes 1 through 3 and Out of Time and whatnot, they're great. I love them, but they don't work in quite the same way as this when you're listening to a series, and you're getting that sort of story arc feel to it. It just lifts things and adds that extra dimension. It helps you get more invested as a listener when you're listening to this as part of a series, or something like this where as part of a series. And it's not just an hour and you're done and it's a standalone story, So that's great. I think it makes excellent use of the Terry Nation elements. It brings something new into every little element. The Daleks are used, thankfully, very sparingly, and it does feel nice and punchy when they do turn up then, nearer to the end. I like revisiting those lesser seen parts of the Doctor Who universe, those more 1960s inspired bits, and those parts that sort of originate from the 1960s, the likes of the Space Security Service, and giving them that sort of like a New Who sheen. I was thrilled, and still am thrilled, that the meddling monk made it in the form of the nun. One of the very best reveals and cliffhangers and whatnot, as we talked about in the last episode. But it's just great to hear the 10th Doctor going up against a Time Lord. Not even a villain as such, just another Time Lord character in the monk, in this, because it's nice that he gets that little bit where it's not just the last of the Time Lords thing, and it's not total antagonism in the form of the Master. So big plus. Really liked hearing that. Thought it was incredible that they've managed to work that in with the monk. So that was great. And again, I said it last time. It's an absolute testament to David Tennant, Jane Slavin, and Joe Sims that they managed to very, very quickly and effectively integrate themselves as a TARDIS crew. That I remember the gap between Dalek Universe 1 and 2, sitting going, "Oh, I can't wait to hear the 10th Doctor, Anya and Mark again." They felt like a really properly solid TARDIS crew from, even though the TARDIS, like I said, TARDIS crew, like a really solid leading trio from the word go. So I would love to hear something like this again from Big Finish. I think they maybe will struggle to get something of the same, something that feels just as momentous as this. Without David Tennant, because I think that's a big part of why this did feel so exciting at the time. But I would love to hear them do this more, where they just take do a series of Doctor Who in the way this was, that it is a big tentpole release, that it's released periodically throughout the year, that there's this ongoing story arc that you can look forward to. I think it's a really effective way of working. And it's not one that they do too often now. They still get it turning up in places like the 11th Doctor Chronicles that have just come out, do feel probably the closest analogue to this. Um,
Or perhaps Torchwood.
You've got the likes. Yes, nah, yes, absolutely. You've got Torchwood in there, and the Sixth Doctor and Hebe stories. I would argue fit into a similar sort of mold of this. No, not exactly the same, but I would love them to do that where you're very eagerly anticipating the next release. It's something that you're looking forward to, and you're excited to hear. You're waiting for it, and because you've because it's something that you can get invested in as a listener, this ongoing story arc, and it's not just a standalone box set that you can pick up when you feel like it. So yeah, much more like this, please. I think this is a fantastic way of doing things. Doesn't necessarily have to be with David Tennant. I would love them to do. It's the same. It's like they haven't done this so much really since Stranded with the Eighth Doctor. I'm really starting to miss it, but sort of go back to the likes of those Doom Coalition and Ravenous sets where you've got that ongoing arc and you're really, you're very eagerly anticipating the next set. I would love to get back into that sort of thing again with Big Finish.
And ideally, not leaving it too long between releases, because I feel like it's nice to have them spaced out, but the Eighth Doctor ones, it can be quite a wait between them sometimes.
Yeah,
But I think Dalek Universe came out in quite close sequence, if I remember right. Like
they were very
it
regular,
wasn't.
if I remember correctly. There was 3 months
Yeah,
between each set, and it was a very regular release pattern.
I think last year's Torchwood series really benefited from being 3 months on the bounce. Was it May, June, and July? I think,
yeah.
and they knocked the monthly range on the head, and they gave us a set a month, and that was a series. And yes, it was over far too quickly, but at the same time, it felt really good having this coherent series, and it is a series. It's a run of stories. It felt really good having that, while you could still sort of vividly remember what went on previously. They didn't quite do it like this, but I saw it suggested somewhere that they could actually have done it every 4 weeks. So it was 4 episodes. They could have done it 4 weeks. So if you wanted to, you could have listened to it one episode a week over 12 weeks. Now, in the end, it was closer to sort of 6 to 8 weeks gap in between sets, because one was the start of the month, the next one was the middle, the next one was the end. But I think that's probably the closest we've had since Dalek Universe.
I've actually really liked what they've done with the Eighth Doctor the last couple of years, and unfortunately, they're not doing it this year. But they waited, and there was the Eighth Doctor sort of main releases for the years were kept until the end and released in fairly quick succession in November and December. They did that with the last two Live in Helen sets, and they did it with the Audacity and Charlie sets last year. And I thought that was a really good way of working because it felt like you were waiting for the next series of the Eighth Doctor, and it was coming to you at Christmas time. I loved that. And it felt, like you were getting 6 episodes in fairly quick succession. They are now splitting it up. I think there's there's a new Live in Helen set this year, in like May or July or sometime in around then. I think I'm going to miss that sort of wait and then that solid blast of the whole series coming out at once towards the end of the year.
No, I agree, and I'm just guessing that the reason that they've gone back is maybe for people who only buy one or two TARDIS teams. Those people might be, going for a long time without any Big Finish stuff. So, but yeah, I think for those of us who consume a lot of it, I agree. It's nice to have a sustained focus on one team or one arc for a little bit.
I think the Live in Helen stuff's interesting because we're so used to having Live in Helen in an ongoing series, Doom Coalition, Ravenous, Stranded, that it's actually slightly odd to have these stories that are coming out now where we know how and when roughly Liv leaves, and B, we don't know what happens to Helen at all. As much as I don't want to see the back of Liv, I love Liv. Liv is one of my favourite companions ever at all. But I kind of do want to see where the Eighth Doctor and Helen go next, or does something happen to Helen that causes Liv to decide to go back to Tanya in 2020 and all that kind of thing. And I like to think that will get explored. However, I also think that maybe we're going to be stuck in a bit of a let's dig up this TARDIS team every couple of years limbo. But it kind of feels as though it's lost a sense of momentum since Stranded ended, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good to have stories that are free of storylines or the 11 turning up or whatever. I really did enjoy Doom Coalition and Ravenous and Stranded, but so there are advantages and disadvantages, I guess, of this. I'd love to see them pick up in a series style format at any time, though. I'd really love to see that. To be honest, I'd love to see any Doctor have a series at some point, have something like Dalek Universe. We've had a lot of Third Doctor stuff from Big Finish, but we've never had anything like that. Same with First and Second, and arguably Fifth as well. I suppose we had the Mark arc for Fifth, didn't we?
Yeah, that was that. I really enjoyed it. I also it sprung into mind there. Shadow of the Daleks as well. Felt
yes.
it sort of has a similar sort of feel where it's an ongoing series, although each element does feel a little more standalone in that case.
It's just the reverse of this, really, isn't it? Because it's the Fifth Doctor going the other direction
Yeah,
across
yeah.
the Time War.
Lockdown definitely led to a lot of Time War jumping. Well, just one more point of discussion, really, which a consistent thing throughout Dalek Universe and indeed before, Connor, you and I have talked about all of Anya's adventures now, going right back to the Fourth Doctor stuff, and she's been a great character. And we spoke to Jane Slavin. Jane Slavin was amazing when she came on the podcast, and when we did that, we sort of said, well, we want to do Anya's full story. We want to follow Anya as a character, and we have done. We've talked about all of Anya's stuff now, so just kind of let's have some last words on Anya Kingdom as a character. All the way through the Fourth Doctor and through this. So, do you want to go first, Mansoor?
Yeah, I think if you listen to all of her stuff in sequence, it tells a nice story for her, but with a lot of potential left. I fully agree. I don't want to see what happens for her next with being slightly displaced in time. Maybe a series that like jumps around in her life or has some flashbacks, because with things like the House of Kingdom, I remember saying that there's a lot there to explore with her family and her background and where she's come from before she met the Doctor and all the Anne Kelso stuff. So yeah, she's had a compelling story, but I think there's a lot more potential there to fill stuff out for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure how I want to see it continue, whether it be an Anya spin-off series, whether she, drops in and meets the 10th Doctor a bit later on, although Dalek Universe is definitely towards the end of the 10th Doctor's life. Could we maybe see her with the Doctor after that, earlier than that? It would be very interesting to sort of see where we can take the character next. And I do think the character should go somewhere, absolutely. What about you, Connor?
The only thing I have to say about Anya Kingdom is more, please. I don't think we've had nearly enough of her. I think she's a great character, and I love the energy that Jane Slavin brings to playing her. As I've said earlier on, I don't think her story arc with the Doctor feels entirely resolved. I think my ideal version is where she gets a few spin-off adventures and then reunites with the Doctor at some stage. I would only do that if it was, David Tennant or a later version of the Doctor. I wouldn't want her going back to meet an earlier version and we'll have to do the whole mind wiping thing. I want proper closure to Anya's arc and Anya's relationship with the Doctor. I think it would actually be really fun if at some stage, at some stage, Big Finish, if you get Jodie Whittaker, I think it would be very fun to have a 13th Doctor and Anya, team up at some stage. So yeah, I would love to hear a lot more of Anya. I think it's a great story, the whole Kingdom saga, with the two Master Plan series and Dalek Universe. I think it's a really great run through the history of Doctor Who, with the first Doctor, the fourth Doctor, and the 10th, probably the three most iconic incarnations of the Doctor. And I love that there's this linked series of them now that you can listen to on audio, between the soundtrack of Master Plan and then the Big Finish stuff. So, yeah, that's all I can really say as I've said about Anya is more. I will keep coming back to that stage if I keep talking. So more Anya, please.
And I've not really got anything to add apart from yes, definitely more, please. We love the character. We love the adventures that character's been on so far, and there's definitely more room to be covered. And hopefully, we will see that at some point. But that is all we have time for. So it's been great to discuss this. It's felt like revisiting a proper event, and it was an event that came out at such a strange time. It was, as we know, a lockdown recording and released when maybe lockdown was lifted, but the spectre of COVID was certainly still hanging over us. So it's really wonderful that something so brilliant and I guess creatively satisfying came out of that era, that period of time. So yeah, I'd just love to revisit an awful lot from this, really. But we will leave it there. So I'll say a big thank you to Mansoor.
Thank you.
And a big thank you and goodbye to Connor.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back for more Spodcasting very soon. Goodbye now.